Hey guys, welcome back. I assume this isn't the first time you've been on my channel because hopefully you're coming here from part 1 in this 3-part series on the falls of the Traitor Primarchs. If you're not, no worries. These videos don't really need to be watched in order, and I will still give you a little intro before we get started. I also have a special little message waiting for you between our second and third Primarch, so stick around for that. One of my favorite personal pastimes, even when I'm not working on videos like this one, is going full Redditor mode and learning about the innermost character motivations and the behind-the-scenes events that are often overlooked when we look at large-scale events in 40k. In this series, that large-scale event is the Horus Heresy, and the characters we're looking at are, of course, the 9 guys who decided to throw away their amazing lives and their cushy jobs working for their dad, simply to cause as much pain to the galaxy as they possibly could. Or is that how it happened? In this series, we're taking a deeper look at the Traitor Primarchs so that we can better understand why they made the decisions they did, and we'll also be ranking them on this super cool graph I made. Oh, look at that! As you can see, we've already got Magnus, Lorgar, and Conrad Kurz up there, so let's get 3 more Traitor Primarchs on that today. Let's start off first with Fulgrim. At one point, he was the proudest son of the Emperor. His legion, the Emperor's children, were literally called the Emperor's children. They were the only legion who were granted the permission to wear the Imperial Aquila on the breastplates of their armor. You couldn't find a more loyal and devoted son to the Master of Mankind than Fulgrim. But let's take it back to before the Great Crusade. As with every Primarch in this series, I find that when we want to try to understand their true character, it's best to start at the very beginning. After being torn away from the Emperor's gene lab on Terra, Fulgrim's gestation pod eventually crash-landed on the planet of Chemos, a bleak world that never saw the true light of day, instead always being shrouded in twilight. In this series, I'll try to talk as best as I can about the themes of fate and destiny, and how each Traitor Primarch ultimately had some form of circumstance change their predestined path. Lorgar was meant to be the Primarch of propaganda, but he was raised by perhaps the most religious and also the most insane man in the galaxy, and therefore he became the Primarch of undying devotion. Magnus was originally meant to be the one to man the Golden Throne, using his immense psychic might to power the webway and allow humanity to flourish for eternity. Instead, he accidentally completely destroyed any hope of the webway ever working for humanity, then went home and cried, then got his back broken, and then became a ginormous red demon man. Conrad Kurz was essentially supposed to be a mix of Commissioner Gordon, Batman, and Harvey Dent, but instead ended up being a mix of the Joker, Scarecrow, and Harvey Dent. For Fulgrim, I'm not entirely sure if I know his character well enough to tell you exactly what I think he was destined to be, but I fully welcome your opinions in the comments. What I do know, however, is that he was originally destined to land on Chagoris, the home planet of Jagatai Khan, and the Khan was supposed to land on Chemos. Would this have ultimately changed Fulgrim's fate? Short answer, yes. And we can talk about the long answer a little bit later on. Now, as a child on Chemos, Fulgrim, even at a very young age, showed an incredible understanding of the complex but worn down and broken mining machinery that was used to power Chemos' economy. The economy of Chemos was like literally everything on Chemos. Bleak. Furthermore, Chemos was heavily reliant on interstellar trade for food and other goods, and interstellar trade was not really happening. Not ideal. You could even say that the situation on Chemos was very imperfect, and Fulgrim would absolutely not stand for that. As he grew, he quickly rose from the position of a laborer to one of the highest-ranking individuals on the planet. He organized expeditions to restart long-abandoned mining outposts, and oversaw the construction of more sophisticated and efficient machinery. As a result, Chemos' mining industry began to actually produce surpluses, and from that, its economy improved to the point where off-world goods could finally be purchased in a viable quantity from interstellar trading partners. By this stage, Fulgrim had cemented his place as the de facto ruler of Chemos, having transformed it from a barren, dying wasteland into a lush planet where art and culture could finally thrive. And this is something that's really interesting when we look at the Traitor Primarchs. Pretty much all of them grew up on horrible worlds that stayed horrible, to an extent. Sure, Kurz was able to eliminate the rampant crime on his homeworld of Nostramo, but only for a brief period of time. Magnus was able to save the people of Prospero from the parasitic Psychnuins that used human brains as nests for their eggs. Fucking ew, by the way. But the signs of Prospero's doom became more and more apparent even before Magnus committed like 5 major fuck-ups all in a row. Chemos literally just became nice. Under Fulgrim's direction, everything got better. And during the Great Crusade, after Fulgrim left, Chemos stayed nice. It had rainforests and oceans, vast cities with beautiful skyscrapers that were themselves beautiful works of art. Even after Fulgrim left, the planet continued to flourish under his will. I say all of this to make the point that Fulgrim was a straight-up good dude. He cared about his people, he cared about his planet, he cared about his sons, and something that is very important to note, he cared deeply about the beauty that could be created by humanity. None of the Primarchs are truly one-dimensional, but Fulgrim might have had the most depth and variety of character out of any of them. He lived for the battle, for the perfect kill, for the perfect conquest of a planet, but he also strove to raise those up around him, to encourage the full use of human potential. And as you can see in the novel Fulgrim, he had no disdain for humans, which a lot of Primarchs and plenty of Space Marines did, and still do. In fact, he was obsessed with uplifting and motivating humans to alleviate the barriers that inhibited the human soul from fully expressing itself. Jeez, that's the most douchey sounding thing I've ever written. Let me say it in a way that doesn't make me feel like an asshole. Fulgrim liked art and knew that regular people had the capability to be really good at it, and so he encouraged it. Of course, all of these qualities that we love about Fulgrim were born out of the most baseline aspect of his personality, his obsession with perfection. After Fulgrim met the Emperor of Mankind, he became completely and utterly obsessed with living up to the standards of the Emperor, who he saw as the embodiment of perfection. It became a part of him, just like making 40k lore videos with shitty jokes in them is a part of me. And this is where I can't help but get a little personally conflicted with Fulgrim as a Primarch, because I can't help but see his obsession with perfection as a key characteristic that could very well have made him betray the Emperor eventually, even if the events that led to him falling to chaos didn't play out the way they did. But let's bring it back now to what I was saying about Jagatai Khan and Fulgrim having their homeworld swapped and therefore their fates. Let's just assume, for the sake of the video, that if the Khan had landed on Chemos and Fulgrim on Chagoris, that Fulgrim's life would have followed that of the Khan, and the Khan's life would have followed that of Fulgrim. If they did, then the Khan would have ultimately fallen to chaos in the manner that Fulgrim did, which is, there's no other way to say it, pretty fucked up. As the Emperor's children were finishing up a brutal conquest of an alien planet known as Laren, they discovered something peculiar at a temple that was serving as the last bastion of the Lair, the planet's dominant species. In the center of the temple was a sword, which Fulgrim scooped up, just immediately. Unbeknownst to him, the sword, which would come to be known as the Blade of the Lair, was possessed by a greater demon of Slaanesh. Now, I feel like there were definitely warning signs here, like how when the Lair were brutally killed by the Emperor's children, they literally made sounds of pleasure, like, ugh. That's not the sound they made. That was me making a sound of disgust. Or the fact that the temple that the blade was in was filled with a nightmarish, ear-shatteringly loud noise that somehow seemed to entrance the Emperor's children, and an overpowering smoke that made them feel sick while simultaneously craving more. But Fulgrim just blindly ignored any and all warning signs and was like, sick, cool alien sword. Oh, these aliens are super creepy and weird, and this whole planet is weird, and everything in this temple's fucking weird, but whatever. Let's kill the rest of these stupid aliens, and me and my super sick sword are getting out of here. Now here's where a ton of different but equally important elements surrounding Fulgrim's journey up until this point all come together to cause his catastrophic fall. You guys remember that sort of douchey thing I said earlier? How Fulgrim was obsessed with alleviating the barriers that inhibited the human soul from expressing itself? Well, his obsession with that pursuit was rooted in his obsession with achieving perfection in every aspect of existence. And Fulgrim's undying pursuit of perfection propelled him throughout the Great Crusade. But while he encouraged regular old human beings to strive toward perfecting their unique crafts, he instilled in his legion a bit more of a serious approach. The Space Marines of the Emperor's children were genetically bred to pursue perfection in every aspect of their craft. The perfect sword fight, the perfect bolt pistol reload, the perfect attack strategy on an enemy position, the perfect subjugation of a planet were all tasks that Fulgrim's sons trained for constantly. And Fulgrim himself was obsessed with making his sons perfect, maybe too obsessed. In a private conversation with his chief apothecary Fabius Bile, Fulgrim encouraged him to experiment on the gene seed of his legion and on the warriors themselves, as well as on the various aliens that they would kill during their galactic conquest, to find out if there was any possible way to further enhance his sons. And this is before he's corrupted, so this is, like I was saying, this is where I get a little confused with Fulgrim. He's so obsessed with upholding the honor of the Emperor naming his legion the Emperor's children that he's willing to go to lengths that the Emperor would pretty clearly disagree with to further impress the Emperor? I'll be honest, when I've read about Fulgrim, I've kind of felt like I saw his fall to chaos happening eventually. And if it didn't happen when it did, like I said, I can't help but think that it would have happened later on anyways. So let's get to that. I've yapped enough about Fulgrim at this point, so let's talk about his fall. You see, like I said earlier before I distracted myself, Fulgrim straight up yoinked the blade of the Lair out of their creepy, weird, super loud, smelly temple and didn't really think much else of it. It was a symbol of the conquest of their world in his eyes. But of course, there was a greater demon of Slaanesh who was just chilling in the sword. By the way, if you didn't know, in 40k, demons can chill in swords. A lot of Horus heresy stuff got underway, and Fulgrim found himself drawn to the side of the War Master. Horus had convinced him that the greatest barrier in achieving perfection in literally every single aspect of his existence and the existence of everyone around him was the Emperor. And therefore the Emperor needed to die, and then the power of chaos would allow Fulgrim to be perfect once and for all. Yeah, sure. Bulletproof logic there. Fulgrim then tried to convince his best buddy, Ferrus Manus, to join the cause, but he refused. In the violent encounter that followed, in 40k, every disagreement is followed by a violent encounter, in case you didn't know, Ferrus was actually knocked unconscious, and the Lair Sword demon, who had been whispering sweet, devious, dirty little whimsies to Fulgrim, really doubled down on the deviousness of those whimsies. It practically begged him to kill Ferrus, but Fulgrim found that he couldn't. Despite his willingness to turn against the Emperor, his fellow brothers, and even to cull his own sons, who refused to fall in line with his new ideology, this was the one line that Fulgrim refused to cross. Nah, just kidding. Sometime later, during the drop site massacre on Isfahan 5, the moment when pretty much everything was laid to bear, Fulgrim and Ferrus would engage in another brotherly brawl, this one culminating in tragedy, as the traitor forces annihilated the Salamanders, Ravenguard, and Ferrus's own Iron Hands. Fulgrim, who had had a little more time to be further goaded on by the Lair Blade demon, once again engaged his brother in combat. Fulgrim eventually gained the upper hand, and as Ferrus was brought to his knees and Fulgrim was poised to swing the Lair Blade down upon his best friend, he found himself unable to do it. He paused for a moment and realized that his actions that started with taking the Lair Blade from the temple on Laren and had culminated in this moment had all been horrible mistakes, that his pursuit of perfection to the point of maniacal obsession had not brought him closer to the magnificence that he so desperately desired, but had instead turned him into a monster. At the same time, however, Fulgrim knew deep down that he had gone too far to stop. And as that thought crossed his mind, the Lair Blade began to fall, even as Fulgrim consciously tried to will it not to. The blade seemed to have a mind of its own, almost as if it was possessed by some super evil creepy demon that was birthed by a super evil creepy god. Weird, huh? And it sliced through Ferrus's neck, taking his head clean off. As the dwindling number of loyalists who remained alive at the drop site were systematically picked off, Fulgrim came to the full realization that he had just killed his best friend. Then, some more really important stuff happened, like Fulgrim being so unable to handle the emotional toll of everything he had done that he basically agreed to allow the Lair Blade demon to possess him and become the Fulgrim body demon. Then, the demon, using Fulgrim's possessed body, went around and talked to Horus, who was kind of mortified that his brother had been possessed, which is funny, because this whole Horus heresy thing was Horus's idea. Then the demon talked to Lorgar, who was pretty pissed off that a demon had possessed his brother, which is funny, because this whole aligning with the gods of chaos who have infinite armies of bloodthirsty crazy demons who love to possess people, including Lorgar's sons, was his idea. Fulgrim eventually was able to regain control of his body and banish the demon from his physical form. But after having done so, he revealed to his closest sons that he was now fully intent on going further than anyone ever had before in the pursuit of pleasure and the pursuit of pushing the boundaries of what reality deemed to be possible far past their limits. So, after all that, where does Fulgrim go on our nifty chart? I've seen quite a few people say that they think Fulgrim had the most tragic fall, but I honestly can't bring myself to agree. He was pretty cool when he was loyal, but he still had plenty of underlying character traits that left him open to eventual chaos temptation, even without the influence of the Lair Blade. So, I'm putting Fulgrim here, because I will be honest, we do be sad in the club when we think about the fall of Fulgrim, but this spot is also kind of ironic because if Fulgrim was in the club with us, you can be certain that he and the Slaaneshi demon babes he brought with him would be having the times of their lives. Alright, That piece on Fulgrim was like twice as long as I thought it would be, but what can I say? For all of his creepy weirdness, I like Fulgrim. Next up, let's take a look at a fella who is without a doubt my favorite demon Primarch. I'm really excited for this next part of the video. This is going to be great. I wasn't honestly a huge fan of him when he was a human, or however close a Primarch can get to being a human, but as a giant dual axe wielding demon dragon guy, he's pretty fucking cool. The Primarch who was eternally angry, Angron. In my first video on this topic, when I talked about the fall of Magnus, I said that Magnus had a pretty rough go of things, but that there were a couple others who had a way worse time. Angron is one of those others. Because, oh man, where do we even start? Well, let's start at the beginning, I guess. Angron's gestation pod crash-landed on the planet of Nuceria. Nuceria was a civilized world and had actually remained somewhat technologically advanced after the Age of Strife began. However, the class disparity that existed on Nuceria was unlike most other planets in the galaxy. It was governed by a ruling elite who forced their subjects to fight each other to the death in gladiatorial arenas, which served to distract the impoverished many from the abhorrent wealth held by the ruling few. Angron was discovered in the unforgiving mountains of Nuceria, surrounded by dead Xenos, speculated to be Eldari who had foreseen the destruction he would one day unleash upon the galaxy, and thus went to kill him. Obviously, they didn't foresee that tiny baby Angron would absolutely wreck their shit, and therefore, their shit got wrecked. Like, I can't stress how young Angron was here. He was like 6 hours old. But anyway, in the aftermath, Angron was badly injured and was taken from the mountains by a slaver who then sold him to House Thalker, one of the ruling clans of the planet. Still a young child, Angron was dumped into a gladiatorial arena for the first of many, many times. With him in the arena were hundreds of fellow slaves, and in the center of the arena was a tower whose platforms became smaller the higher up they went, with the highest platform having room for only one person to stand. The arena was slowly filled with acid, and as it rose, the slaves were forced to fight each other to the death to secure those spots on the platforms. Angron would prove to be the sole survivor, and this victory would be his first of many. He quickly rose to fame throughout Nuceria, remaining unbeaten through hundreds of battles. What's very important to note is that while he killed countless foes in the gladiator pits, he always spared those who he felt had fought well. He even gained a father figure at this time, another gladiator by the name of Oenimus. The two became inseparable, as Oenimus was the first person on the entire planet to have shown any compassion or care for Angron. They were also an incredible duo in the arenas, with no others able to stand against them. Their greatest victory came when they slew 2 berserker ogrins who had been cybernetically enhanced with implants known as the Butcher's Nails. After this victory, however, the Nucerian rulers decreed that Angron and Oenimus now had to fight each other to the death. Angron refused, as he knew that he couldn't bring himself to kill the only man who actually cared about him. The result? Angron became the next recipient of the Butcher's Nails. The Nucerians implanted them in Angron's brain in a crude surgery, hammering them through his skull and into his cerebral cortex. The nails were made to boost a warrior's adrenaline in battle and enhance his senses to the point of superhuman levels, but they also erased all reason from the warrior's mind and all other senses, and caused the warrior's brain to only derive pleasure from committing acts of violence, numbing all other senses and causing immense discomfort and pain when doing anything other than beating the shit out of anything and everything in the warrior's path. And the Nucerians had just implanted them in a Primarch, a dude who was literally made by a god and was himself a demigod. They then unleashed this new Angron on Oenimus, and he slaughtered his only friend without hesitation, blinded by a nearly uncontrollable berserker rage. When Angron came to and realized what he'd been forced to do, he was beyond distraught. He grieved for days and swore that he would escape from the gladiator pits of his masters and lead a rebellion that would see them dying by the same savagery they demanded of their slaves. Now here's where we can get into what I think is the most important aspect of Angron as a character, and what makes not just his fall, but his entire life so damn sad. All of what I've just told you is taken from the novel Slave of Nuceria, but I left out a couple details that we'll dive into now. When Angron was in his first fight to the death, as the many others in the arena are fighting to stay alive, Angron finds that despite still being a child, he is easily stronger than any of them. Even when they band together to try to pull him off a platform and throw him into the acid below, he is able to easily resist. And that's the key. He resists. He tries so hard not to be the aggressor, but to simply react to the actions of his foes. He fights not to kill, but to survive. Then, when Angron has to begin acting with aggression to avoid certain death, he goes out of his way to give his fellow gladiators the most painless deaths he can, even at the risk of his own life. Instead of simply pushing or kicking people into the acid below, he uses his innate combat instincts and immense strength to quickly kill them before throwing them off. Finally, when it comes down to Angron and one other, a hulking brute of a man who doesn't hesitate for a second to try to beat him to death, Angron, with immense regret, has to throw him into the acid before killing him, and tears are streaming from his eyes as he watches the other man die slowly in front of him. See, Angron was born with inherent empathy, as seen here, and also demonstrated by his adherence to sparing the lives of gladiators that he felt were worthy. And even beyond that, Angron has shown to have the psychic ability to draw pain and suffering out of others and take it into himself. When he saw a young boy, a new arrival into the pits, shivering and crying after undergoing his first trial, Angron gingerly placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, quieting him instantly and lulling him into a peaceful, deep sleep. And this, my lovely viewers, is where we see yet another terrible twist of fate for one of our traitor Primarchs. Angron was created with immense empathy, with the ability to literally draw out pain and suffering from another person's soul and make it his own, so that they may not suffer. Angron was supposed to be a Primarch of understanding, of a certain level of kindness. So what would his role have been? I'm not entirely sure, but I feel pretty confident in saying that the Imperium definitely could have used a high-ranking general who was in touch with the trillions upon trillions of human beings in the galaxy on an emotional level. And as with all of our traitor Primarchs, of course, that fate was changed. Angron's destiny was twisted from something great into something horrible. It would eventually be discovered that the Butcher's Nails had damaged his brain to the point that not only could he no longer feel happy or empathetic at all, but that he had lost all ability to regulate his emotions. The Butcher's Nails would eventually make it so that the only neurochemicals and neurological signals that flowed through Angron's brain were those related to rage, anger, and despair. After being forced to kill Oenimus, Angron swore that he would escape from the arenas once and for all, and he set a plan in motion. His fame as a warrior had spread across the entire planet, and so he became the centerpiece of the biggest gladiatorial event the world had ever seen. In the midst of the event, however, Angron and all of the gladiators involved turned on the arena guards in a coordinated attack, and despite suffering huge casualties, over 2,000 of them were able to escape. They fled into the mountains outside of the capital city of Deshea, where they remained for a few years, resisting any and all armed forces sent by the rulers of New Syria to kill and recapture them. However, life in the mountains was brutal, and before long, only about half of the escaped gladiators remained. Finally, on the mountain of Fidan Moor, Angron and his cohorts found themselves completely and utterly surrounded by the largest New Syrian armed force yet. There were so many of them that the remaining warriors stood no chance, even under the leadership of the great Angron. And now here is where things get crazy. For whatever reason, the Emperor decided to approach each of his sons in completely different ways once he had located them. Overall, though, he was usually pretty nice. He would compliment them, tell them he was their dad and that he was so happy to have found them, and tell them about all the cool stuff they could get up to together. As the forces of New Syria closed in on Angron and his few remaining warriors for the final time, the Emperor made himself known. He teleported to the world's surface and explained to Angron that a place at his side and an entire legion of warriors made with his genetic material awaited him. To the Emperor's surprise, Angron refused. He stated that his fate was to die alongside his fellow warriors. The Emperor reluctantly teleported back to his flagship, and after some deep contemplation, decided that his son was a big dumb idiot for wanting to stay on the surface of this backwater slave world just to die in a pointless battle. The Emperor knew that Angron was far too important to lose over his sense of honor and loyalty, and so he made a decision that would cause Angron to despise him for the rest of his life. He teleported Angron to his flagship against his will, and to say Angron was devastated would be the understatement of galactic proportions. Without his leadership, Angron's warriors, his best friends, lost all hope and were slaughtered by the armies of the New Syrian overlords as Angron watched helplessly. Why the fuck they let him watch that, I do not know, but they did. Angron demanded to know why the Emperor hadn't intervened to save his friends, and the Emperor told him he lacked vision. Like, yeah bro, great parenting, Mr. E. Tell the guy who's been forced to kill people ever since he could walk that he lacks vision. This guy's entire life has basically taken place inside a gladiator arena as a tortured slave. But he lacks vision. Yeah, word, bro. Believe it or not, Angron never forgave the Emperor for this transgression. And I think literally all of us can understand his point of view. The Emperor planned to conquer New Syria anyways, so why didn't he have his forces kill the overlords of the planet? Why didn't he have them kill the army that was waiting to slaughter Angron's friends? The common people would have been thankful, Angron probably would have approved, and then his 1,000 fellow gladiators would have been spared, and could have been among the first New Syrian aspirants for Angron's legion of Space Marines. Instead, the Emperor went full ridiculous decision mode and made Angron hate him forever. Because think of it this way, Angron felt that he had been forced to trade one master for another. After a lifetime of being enslaved to the New Syrian overlords, he now felt that he was a slave to the Emperor and the Imperium. I mean, when you think about it, the Emperor did have 2 of his Primarchs and their legions erased from all of history for whatever reasons, so it was completely fair for Angron to feel that he had no choice in this whole matter, because he literally didn't. After a very tense and violent first meeting with his legion, the Warhounds, Angron was eventually brought around to the idea of leading his Gene sons by Karn, captain of the 8th Assault Company. Over the course of the Great Crusade, Angron's leadership of his legion, who were soon thereafter renamed the World Eaters, was controversial. He decreed that his warriors would have only 31 Terran hours to capture each planet they were tasked with bringing into the Imperial fold, as 31 Terran hours was the equivalent to 1 New Syrian day. When his Astartes failed to live up to his demand, he enforced decimation, wherein 1 of every 10 warriors involved in the battle were beaten to death by their own brothers. Eventually, World Eater's apothecary Surlak was able to reverse engineer the butcher's nails in Angron's skull and create new versions that could be implanted in the warriors of the World Eaters. Many of Angron's sons readily agreed to undergo the procedure, so that they could be recreated in the image of their gene father. And the whole time, the Emperor was more or less willing to turn a blind eye to Angron's unhinged methods, as they proved to be very effective at bringing planets and entire systems into the Imperial fold. And so, finally, when the Horus heresy unfolded, Angron was amongst the most willing participants in Horus's civil war. He needed literally no convincing. Like, the Emperor sent Horus to seek Angron out and to tell him to chill out with all the insane shit he was doing, and Horus, who had already sworn his allegiance to Chaos, instead asked Angron to join him in his betrayal of the Emperor, and Angron was like, yeah? I've been wanting to do this for like 100 years. When do we start? Have we already started? Can we start now? Can I start today? Let's get this going. The lore surrounding Angron's fall to Chaos and everything that happened afterwards is way more expansive than his pre-fall lore, but for the sake of keeping this video short and for the sake of my own sanity, since I've been writing the script for this video for like a week and a half at this point, we won't be going into all of his excursions of cross-galactic slaughter today. But we will fast forward about 10 years to after the Horus heresy had wrapped up, by which point Angron had been transformed into the demon Primarch of Khorne, the chaos god of blood, war, and murder. He is now one of the most active Traitor Primarchs, alongside another guy we'll be talking about pretty soon. And I'm biased, because I absolutely love Angron, but he has the best Traitor Primarch model, maybe even the best Primarch model, maybe even the best model of any character in all of 40k. Like, just look at this. The artwork about Angron and the World Eaters also is just the best. And, let me even take it further, Khorne is the best Chaos God, and that is a fact, and I will not be accepting counter arguments. But with all that being said, where does Angron rank in terms of my sadness for him? Guys, without any shadow of a doubt, when I think about Angron's fate, I cry every time. He is by far one of the most tragic characters in 40k, failed by literally every single person in his life except for Oenimus, who he was forced to kill, and his fellow gladiators, who he saw killed before his eyes. Angron deserved better. Alright, remember in the beginning of the video when I said I had a special little message waiting for you? Well, here it is. I wanted to add a little bit of background info to this video since it's taken some time to get it out. I'm in the trenches in university right now with final season coming up, And I also work full-time, and we get extra busy around the holidays. Due to those factors, it's taken me some extra time to get this video made, and also as you can see, this video is a lot longer than part 1, mostly due to how much I love Fulgrim and Angron. But if you're a new viewer, if you're not subscribed, or if you're just enjoying this video, all I ask is that you please consider showing your support however you choose to. And if you're still here, thanks for watching this far. Alright, enough yapping. I hope you enjoy the last Primarch I have in store for you. Perturabo. Perturabo's gestation capsule crash-landed on the civilized world of Olympia. He was eventually found by the guards of the ruler of Olympia, Demekos, after having spent time wandering from minor settlement to minor settlement, either working as an immensely skilled artisan or as a hired mercenary. Having been brought before Demekos, Perturabo showcased his abilities, beating his best warriors in combat, while also solving any and all puzzles and mental challenges offered to him. Perturabo was seen by many on Olympia as cold and untrustworthy, as a guy who, despite being extremely closed off to all those around him, clearly had something deeper going on under the surface. Simultaneously, many others saw his ravenous hunger for knowledge and his unceasing adherence to training and bettering himself. Both of these sides of Perturabo were born out of the same root cause. As a youth, Perturabo had come to see a strange formation in the night sky, a massive maelstrom of blue, purple, and green located far from Olympia but still dominating a large section of its night sky had appeared before his very eyes. When he asked others if they could see it too, he was met only with confusion. He was the only one who could see it, and he felt as if it was gazing at him, judging him and measuring his worth at all times. The reason Perturabo could see this strange formation was due to an inherent psychic gift. He was born with the ability to see the flaws in all things. And this maelstrom, a massive flaw in the fabric of reality, was the Eye of Terror. As Perturabo grew, so did his reputation. However, there was nothing that he was better known for than his inventions that tied directly into the ongoing war effort on Olympia. And although there was speculation that Perturabo would one day overthrow Demekos and take rule of Olympia for his own, he never did, as he honored the oath that he had sworn many years earlier. When Demekos had Perturabo brought before him in his court, he had told him that he would take him in, provide him with anything and everything he needed to learn and nurture his superhuman mind and body, in exchange for Perturabo's loyalty, and he stayed true to this oath until the day he left Olympia. When the Emperor arrived on Olympia, the whole process of introducing himself to Perturabo and going over that whole spiel, in extremely stark contrast to the last one we talked about, remember, the whole Angron thing, happened very quickly and without much fuss. The Emperor informed Perturabo of his true calling, to reunite the lost worlds of the galaxy under the control of the Imperium, and Perturabo was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. I'm literally taller, faster, stronger, and smarter than every single person on this planet. So yeah, I probably should be doing some crazy space war stuff. Kinda hit my limit here. And Demekos, who saw the opportunity to rule all of Olympia once and for all as its imperial governor, was happy to let Perturabo go, seeing it as a price to pay for his guaranteed power. Having been taken back to Terra to learn more about his role in the future of mankind, Perturabo found a world packed with knowledge and history waiting to be learned. As he spent his time ravenously devouring every piece of human lore he could find, it became clear that of all the Primarchs, he was the most gifted in terms of his raw technical intelligence and understanding of science. Despite this, Perturabo remained closed off, not interested in overcomplicating matters. He saw his purpose in life very simply, to uncover everything he possibly could about the workings of everything, and to serve the Emperor's ambitions, because doing so would allow him to uncover everything he possibly could about the workings of everything. The Emperor, on the other hand, was very happy with this, because deep down, he thought of all of his sons simply as tools needed to accomplish the monumental task of bringing the galaxy into compliance. Perturabo knew he was but a single tool in the Emperor's arsenal, and was content in his role, at first. Remember that Perturabo's gift, if you want to call it that, was that he was able to see the flaws in anything, given enough time to examine it. Unfortunately for his own legion, the Iron Warriors, he saw some flaws in them after reviewing their war record and the general practices they had maintained before being reunited with him. Now, Perturabo, as I said earlier, is the most technically gifted, intelligent Primarch, so did he come up with some crazy new, never-before-thought-of processes to streamline and synergize his sons? No. He ordered 10% of them to be beaten to death by all the others. if that sounds familiar. Remember, that's also what Angron had forced his sons to do after he had had half his brain rotted away by the butcher's nails. But yeah, Perturabo, you're the smartest Primarch, so you keep doing you, pal. Good job, buddy. As the Iron Warriors, now rebuilt by Perturabo, waged war for humanity throughout the Great Crusade, they gained the reputation of being the greatest living siege machine the galaxy had ever witnessed. No fortress or defense could withstand them, no enemy could hold them back, and no world could defend against their efforts. However, Perturabo's mentality around war resulted in his legion suffering the highest attrition rates of any during the Great Crusade, and the tremendous losses of his warriors, coupled with a continued indifference from the Emperor, began to breed resentment towards him, not only in Perturabo, but in his legion as well. And as the Great Crusade wore on, this resentment only grew, and eventually Perturabo's ability to see the flaws in everything manifested itself most clearly in two regards. First of all, and this is a theory I've read, so take it with a grain of salt, Perturabo eventually turned his ability on himself and saw within him all of the tiny flaws that kept him from being the truly supreme being that he believed he was destined to be. And second, Perturabo became increasingly aware of all of the flaws within the Imperium and all of the flaws in the Emperor's leadership. I mean, we've talked a lot about a pretty big flaw in the Emperor's leadership already in this video, so rest assured there were a lot more. One of the greatest flaws in the Emperor's leadership was his appointment of Horus as War Master, who was corrupted by Lorgar, who had been brutally censured by the Emperor for loving him too much. There's another flaw for you. And as a result, Perturabo didn't exactly fall to chaos, as we see with Magnus, Fulgrim, or a few others. He more so just switched sides. He found in Horus a leader who was understanding and appreciative of his gifts and abilities, and in Chaos, he found the promises of being able to truly be, once and for all, flawless. So, where does Perturabo fit on our chart? Well, there's a tiny part of me that almost feels a little tiny bit bad for him, because he was basically an outcast his whole life, but also, when he wasn't being an outcast, he was just kind of an asshole. Plus, he seems pretty cool with the whole chaos thing. He's in a good spot, he doesn't have allegiance to one chaos god, he's quite a lot of his Iron Warriors still loyal to him, and he's got a demon planet full of slaves at his disposal. As far as falling to chaos goes, Perturabo's in a pretty great position, and so we're gonna put him here. Perturabo is, at this point, #warp-blessed. Good for you, Perturabo, I guess. You're doing some utterly horrifying shit on Medringard, but you seem to be happy. So, that's something. And, my dearest, most loveliest audience members who have stayed with me to the end, do you know what makes me even happier than Fulgrim getting faded with hot demon babes? Happier than Perturabo trapping a greater demon inside a super dreadnought? And happier than Angron, killing lots of stuff? My incredible channel members. You are the Full to my Grim, the Ang to my Gron, and the Pertur to my Rabo. If Fulgrim ran this channel, he'd be amazed at the perfection that can be found in its members. If Perturabo ran this channel, he'd see the most flawless channel members on all of YouTube. And if Angron ran this channel, this video would have had a lot less coherent thought and a lot more yelling. If you'd like to become a channel member, you can do so through the link in the description. And if you've made it all the way to the end, thanks for watching. Check out part 1 and 3 if you haven't, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Until next time, see ya!